So here we go, the first podcast since the season started. And we actually have a win to talk about. Sorry, it's just the troublesome two today, me and Ben. Pete's not able to make it. We did try to bring another guest on, but unfortunately they weren't able to do it, so happens. But anyways, so Ben, how you doing then?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. After the first week of the season, I'm really upbeat now. It's a total change from after the Celtic game.
Yeah, you couldn't even get a complete contrast and difference between the two tones. Mind you, I'm usually quite pessimistic. I think you're the pessimistic one usually out of the group, and if you seem optimistic, then we must have something to go off.
Yeah, I wouldn't say pessimistic, I'd say realistic, but that's just me.
I was going to say you were pretty pessimistic after the Celtic game, albeit justifiably, but still.
I think that day just did me, and everything outside of the ground and inside of the ground was terrible that day, but certainly picked up since then, which is good to see.
Yeah, we'll not talk about the Celtic game, guys. Obviously, we've gone through that already, and we just don't want to. Yeah, let's just talk about the positive stuff. So anyway, we have a win to talk about. Obviously, we didn't really talk that much about the Derby game, although just quick, in context of the first two games. Ben, what do you think at the start? We've obviously got through to the second round of the Cup, we've beat Bury, and we've obviously picked up a point against Derby, and we obviously beat Norwich. So what was your verdict so far this season?
Yeah, the verdict is really well. Grayson's unbeaten, so that's a positive. In the Derby game, we went 1-0 down, and normally we crumble at that point, and we came back and gave a really good performance. And also what I noticed is the fans didn't get on the players' backs, which was great to see. It was all really positive, even at 1-0 down in the stadium. And the Bury game, we just did what we had to do. It wasn't a great performance, but we won. And, that's all you can ask for out of the team. So I'm really pleased with the first week of the season.
I would say I am as well. I think all I've really seen of the Bury and Norwich games are the goals. You'll have obviously watched. I think you'll have watched all three games. The only game I watched was the Derby County game, and although that's like old news at this point, it's like a week and a half ago. It was still enough there alone in that game to make me feel quite positive for the season, but only if we built on it. Obviously against Bury, from what I heard, we weren't spectacular, but got the job done. I loved that George Honeyman actually finally gets a goal for himself. And then obviously against Norwich, a team that I insist will be right up there come the course of the season.
Yeah.
To get 3 points there, certainly speaks well for me. So but you obviously watched the Norwich. I tried to watch the Norwich game, couldn't get round to it. So you obviously did manage to watch it. So from the verdict that when we were talking after the game, the verdict you put was that first half we were pretty poor, but then second half we were much better. If I'm right, anyway.
First half, we rode a storm. We did. I think, looking back on it, Grayson probably told the players to just sit off Norwich a bit because it was their first home game in the Championship this season. They were going to come out all guns blazing, and I'd had the pleasure of watching Norwich's full game the week beforehand when I was away in Europe. And I viewed them for the first time there, and I thought Sunderland could be in for a game here. And certainly in the first 20 minutes of the game against Sunderland, you could see that. You could see Norwich were going all out to get a goal. But Sunderland, to be fair to them, we stuck at it. And obviously the goal from Graben was it was route one by Steele, wasn't it? But that's great to see. It's a different outlet that we'll have now with Vaughan and Graben up front.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think certainly the Norwich game, the one thing I think that did benefit, because I've watched a lot of Norwich City stuff on YouTube, and from what they were saying, it's basically Daniel Farke's only got 3 games in if you include the Cup, but 2 in the league. And it's going to take a bit of time for them to sort of implement his system properly to the players. We know first-hand experience with Poyet, when you try to play the slow possession out from the back, it can take a bit of a time to get used to say the least. And I think didn't they miss a few key players? Ivo Pinto was out injured, and he's one they rate highly. I don't know I know they had a couple of other key players out injured, so I would imagine on some level, not to take anything away from Sunderland, that definitely helped in some respects, but you take what you can get.
Yeah, to be fair to Sunderland, you can only beat what's in front of you. So, I was more than happy with the performance and the fact that we didn't crumble when we went 3-1 down. I think Sunderland fans can be the only fans in this earth that can be nervous when they're 3-1 up. And I was really nervous at 3-1 up because Norwich were starting to turn it on a bit. Sunderland were dropping back. And you could kind of see the signs coming, but fortunately we're held out. And that's a really positive aspect for this season, that we can hold on to victories.
It makes a nice change from just crumbling and conceding 2 goals in 3 minutes or even less than that, doesn't it?
Yeah, you're kind of expecting that on Sunday, to be honest, in the last 10 minutes. They brought Oliveira on, who scored the previous week against Fulham, and it was kind of all the signs were ominous to say that they were going to come back into the game. But I mean, I must praise Piers Brown, and I mean, he was absolutely fantastic. I can't praise that young guy enough. He's going to become such a player. He was solid at the back on Sunday.
Yeah, that's the general consensus, I think. I'll tell you one thing you mentioned earlier. One thing I would say with Oliveira, well, obviously this is just from the outside, so if any Norwich fans are watching this, if any would happen to be listening to this or watching it, what I would say is, if Oliveira, I think Oliveira did very well for them last year, so what I would say is, why on earth is Daniel Farke not picking him? I understand maybe the certain place, maybe he doesn't suit the system he's trying to play, but the fact is if he gets you goals, you have to try and figure out a way to get him into the system. On the other hand, you could argue Poyet tried that with Defoe, and that was what ultimately finished him, so I'm not entirely sure, but either way, I'll tell you what. One thing I did like from the Norwich game, one of the many things I liked was it Steele's distribution for Graben's first. If that was Jordan Pickford, we'd be labelling him on how fantastic ability he is, or has rather. So,
Yeah, Steele's come in for a lot of criticism in the last week, hasn't he? So, I mean, being away from the country as much as I have done this week, I've been a bit blind to it. But when I came back, I was reading a lot of forums, and they were saying, Steele's distribution's not great. His capturing's not great. Which, to be fair, in the Derby game, there was a few scary moments. But I certainly feel like on Sunday he made a good save in the first half from Russell Martin, getting down to his right hand side, which was a good save. So and like you say, his distribution was really good as well. So not quite the 10 out of 10 performance, but he's getting there. I was much more impressed by him on Sunday than I was the previous week.
Well, that's at least encouraging to hear. Certainly for Steele, that will get his confidence going. I mean, obviously his distribution for Graben's first, I mean, that could just be a one-off thing that he's done, but I think certainly some of the criticism that Steele's come in for is certainly after the Celtic game, probably a bit warranted, but again, he was given no protection in front of him. I'll still stand by that. And I think against Derby, he was a bit shaky first. The Derby game, he was shaky the first half, but second half started to grow in composure a little bit as the game wore on. So, did he play against Bury? Steele?
I'm not sure, Michael. Ryder might have played that game.
I'll have a look. I'm very sad and stat heavy, so I'll have a look.
The Bury game, I'm glad Honeyman got a goal as well, because he played really well against Derby. He's kind of been the shining light this season, actually. I think maybe the unsung hero, so to speak, because I think he's found his level. He was a bit outclassed in the Premier League being a young kid, but definitely this is a platform for him to grow, especially with Capmore and Ndong behind him as well. I mean, that can only be a good thing. He's got so much security in the midfield that lets him play his way.
One thing I would say, in addition to Honeyman, is I'm very glad, because I think he's a local lad. He seems to me, he didn't really pull up any trees in the Premier League last season, but nobody did. And obviously, I think by the time Honeyman came in, we were already down. But as far as this season's concerned, I think with Honeyman, he could. I say this all the time, so apologies, I'm a broken record again, but his pure energy and work rate cannot be underestimated. It's definitely something that gets you a long way. I mean, we had a debate about this after the game, which we'll touch up on in a minute. But I think with Honeyman, his industry and the way he gets about it's so crucial at this level. And I mean, obviously, I know we're talking about a cup game here, but I mean, one benefit that Honeyman might think is, although our general financial state isn't very good, obviously we're probably more skint than we probably thought we were even. This gives it the positive aspect is at least it gives the youngsters a chance in order to try and push on and make a stake and claim in the first team. And certainly, if they're not going to do it this season, then I can't see any other season that they're going to do it, really.
Yeah, I agree with that. They've got a great chance as well, especially the under-21s won on Friday night, I think it was.
It's against Tottenham, wasn't it?
Tottenham, yeah, that was a great win. So, I mean, I know some of the first team players were playing in that in the first half. I'm just going off what I've saw on certain forums. When Oviedo was playing, I think Gilabodji played in the first half, and we were a bit outclassed by Tottenham. But then when they brought the youngsters on into their normal surroundings, they seemed to turn the game around, and it was plain sailing from there. So that's only good signs. You could take that one of two ways, really.
Yeah, I would say from the youngsters' perspective, it's good. Is it concerning about Oviedo and Dillabodji that if they come off suddenly we start playing better?
I'll still stand by Oviedo as a Premier League player. When he comes back, that takes us on to Galloway as well, playing at left back. Galloway has not really impressed me, to be honest, but it's still early in the season, new surroundings for the guys, so
yeah.
I'm willing to give him a bit longer before I publicly criticise him too much.
I think with Galloway, that's the one weak link so far that I would say that I think out of all the signings that have come in, I mean, obviously I can't really comment on Reuter because he's barely played. I've been seeing what he's like at Bradford in pre-season. That's one game. As far as the rest of the signings are concerned, though, Galloway is the one that I'm thinking of where he hasn't impressed too much. I think he looks a bit naive defensively. I don't think he looks assured. He reminds me a little bit of Patrick Van Aanholt, except he's not a dick, and also he hasn't got the blistering pace that Van Aanholt's got. So he's somewhat a threat going forward. I mean, I'm basing this off the Derby game because that's the one game I did watch. It was his fault, in my opinion, for Derby's goal in that match, but it was also a case of that every time he tried to go forward, he did it. Don't get us wrong, he tries his socks off. So I can only applaud him for that, but he doesn't exactly fill me with confidence defensively. But the other thing is Galloway's probably going to have to play a good portion of this season because I mean, as much as Oviedo, I do agree with you actually. I think Oviedo is a Premier League left back, but at the same time, can you really count on him to be fit consistently? That's the one big worry that I've got. So Galloway might have to play whether we like it or not.
Yeah, I think we'll be seeing them two interchanging, but through the season, the amount of games we've got, definitely. And I mean, you've got to give Galloway his due because this is. I don't know. Has he played in the Championship before, Michael?
I'm not sure. Last season, I think he was on loan at West Brom. Apparently, Everton fans were more excited were more high praising of Galloway than Browning when they first came. And obviously, so far, Galloway is the one who looks like he's struggling a little bit. And again, bearing in mind 3 games in, and Browning looks the one who looks more assured and composed. So make of that what you will.
I mean, the only saving grace there is that we do have Oviedo coming back, and Oviedo and Galloway a bit of competition. Galloway as well. That'll only be for good.
Yeah, well, we have Oviedo coming back before he breaks his foot after 5 minutes of playing and is out for another 6 months probably.
As long as he scores when he breaks his foot, I'm not bothered.
Yeah, as long as it's not an own goal. But anyways, we'll move on from left backs. I mean, you mentioned Browning before. Now again, I'm not really going to be much use, guys. Ben's going to be the one that's going to provide more insight than me. But based on the Derby County game, Browning did look composed. He looked assured, and I think Browning having a full season in the Championship because it's like a real man's game. It's a real tough physical league, and I think it can only develop. I mean, obviously, I think we know that if Browning does well here, we ain't going to keep him for longer than a season. He's probably going to go back, and Everton will either send. I don't know actually. If we went up, I could see him coming back here again on loan. But if not, then there's no chance we'll have him next season. But Browning so far, based on what everyone said and what I've seen of him, he looks very composed.
Yeah, he reminds me of Johnny Evans when we were last in the Championship. A young guy who's got so much potential and will make it just because his work ethic's fantastic. You know, he's solid. He seems switched on all of the time. And him and Cornier actually they're a very good partnership, which kind of makes me want to keep Cornier. And I know that'll kind of go against the grain of Sunderland fans at the moment. But you know, you don't want to change things. You don't want to change a winning formula. And I think Browning, as much as Cornier has maybe been a bad influence on the club, maybe Browning's learning a lot off Cornier in training. You know, that could be the case.
Possibly. I'll tell you what. Sorry. I'll tell you what, Mike. To be fair, with Cornier, I mean, we'll get onto that in a moment again. But I think a season at this level, if he's learning from experienced pros, so to speak, and is playing against like tough physical players every week, that can only benefit his development. I mean, if you're mentioning the comparison to Johnny Evans, I mean, that certainly can't be a bad thing. If you're mentioning Johnny Evans, then that might be us going up then. I'm not going to get too carried away, but still, I can hope.
yeah, I mean, the way it's looking now, we've kind of beat a team who's definitely going to be up there, and we're due against a team who's definitely going to be up there. So we'll have the quality. You know, there's no reason to suggest why we can't be up there. But yeah, like you say, it's only 3 games into the season, so
exactly.
Yeah.
One thing
I agree with you.
The one thing I mean, as great as winning on Monday. Can't even speak now. As great as winning on Sunday was, and it was a great win because I actually thought at best we were going to get a draw from the Norwich game. I was expecting a really, really tough match, and by the sound of it, it was. But the only one thing I can be concerned with, and I think Ben will probably agree with me on this, I do worry that I think I've said in the WhatsApp group chat as well, I think Short and Bain, particularly Short, will look at the fact, oh, well, drew with Derby, unlucky not to win. We beat Norwich. We don't need any more players. We're sorted. And that's far from the case. We definitely need more players than this. I mean, the one way that Pete looked at it when we were talking before was that he said, think about it. If we could draw with Derby and beat Norwich, what we've got now, imagine what we could do with a few extra quality additions for this league. But I don't think the hierarchy is going to think of it that way.
I agree with you in that sense. I think this can't paper over the cracks because we don't have an in-depth squad, and if we get injuries, I mean, I just look up front, to be honest. If we get an injury to Graben, who you going to bring on? I mean,
Exactly.
are you going to play Vaughan up front? That's a real scare, and I don't know Graben's injury record. I don't know if he's susceptible to injuries a lot, but he's definitely been obviously the goal talisman so far, and if we lose him, I'll be scared. I mean, McCormack seems to be a bit dead now. That deal, it doesn't seem to be getting the hype it was. So maybe that one's not going to happen. But yeah, like I say, I still think we need another centre back. Beside that, in my heart of hearts, I do think Cornea will leave before the end of the season, probably on the last day of the transfer window. I think when people start really getting desperate for players, especially in the Premier League, that happens a lot. So yeah, I still think we need to pull our fingers out in the transfer market. But again, I don't see that happening until we sell players, and it's been touted around, and I still believe in that notion that until we sell players, that's not going to happen.
Well, I'll tell you what, to be fair, with Cornet, I stand by what I mean. I know what you said about Oviedo, and this is going to come, I might come under some stick for this, I don't know. I still think Cornet at his best is a top quality Premier League centre. I still think that Cornet at his best is a top quality Premier League centre back. So it makes last season all the more annoying for me. As far as I'm concerned with that, though, yeah, I think you're right. I think that Cornet will go. I think certainly in the last week of the window, when it comes to people trying to sign players, especially when they're desperate for players, when they've missed out on targets, I think Cornet will go. I can see Cornet going to someone like a West Ham. Heck, I'm even going to throw it out there. I could see Cornet going to Burnley. If they don't get a replacement for Keane, I think Cornet could be, on paper, a good fit for Keane's replacement. I think he could fit the way Burnley play. But it's his attitude thing again. So, as far as you mentioned with players leaving, Kasri's an interesting one now because I'm starting to shift a bit on him. I've harped on constantly about how crucial Kasri will be for us, about how massive as a player he would be for Sunderland if he stayed in the Championship. But I can't ignore the fact Moyes didn't start him, and I still think Moyes was an idiot for that. But then I can't ignore the fact that Grayson hasn't started him. Because I can't ignore the fact that Grayson hasn't started him either.
I mean, I'm more concerned with the game he played against Bury. I just thought he was so lightweight. He was being pushed off the ball. He just didn't look confident. He went through on goal, took the keeper and slipped over. I mean, that just kind of sums
I
him
remember that
in a nutshell, really. And I'm just thinking he's not up for the fight this year. And I was with you, Michael, before the season. I said keep Kasri at all costs. But now seeing him against Championship opponents or League One opponents, even, I'm not so sure. I think he will probably look to leave.
Yeah, and I think you probably question at this point whether his heart's actually in it now. I mean, we can't forget he was one of the players that Darren Gibson cited as ones that don't care. So what does that tell you? So I think certainly if you're basing it off that, then again, I mean, I would like to think that we could get a good bit of money for Kasri, but I've been disappointed so far. With the exception of Pickford, I've been disappointed with most of our transfer outs in terms of the fees we've got. So I never know. Kasri probably has a release clause, like a relegation release clause. It wouldn't surprise me. Same with Cornet. I think Cornet's is 18 million. Last I remember, I was listening on another podcast, and they were saying they think the Cornet's release clause is 18 million, but no one's going to pay for that in their right mind. If Kasri's got one, it's probably going to be 5 or 6 million, really.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if we get more than maybe 9 million for both of them. If I'm totally honest, just the way that we've conducted business this year, we seem desperate to offload these players, and I don't think the hierarchy is so bothered about the transfer fee. I think it's more about the wages they need to get off the club. That's kind of taking up most of the worry at the moment. And I don't think Ellis Shaw or Martin Bain will be sitting there trying to kind of get the last nth degree of the penny in the transfer fee.
You would
I don't think that's a problem.
I mean, 9 million for the pair of them. I think. Well, obviously, I don't think any of us would be happy with that. I think 9 million for each of them, so 18 million altogether, I think would be good. But in today's day and age, that's what we should be aiming to get. What I would say then is, I mean, you mentioned Khazri and Coney will probably be our two highest earners at this point, or certainly two of the highest earners. One thing that did concern me, the fact that with Khazri's absence, do we have anyone who is like good at set pieces? So far, McGeady's obviously. We'll talk about McGeady. We haven't really talked about the two match winners, funnily enough, in the Norwich game yet. McGeady's goal fantastic, but his cross, especially for grabbing second, was phenomenal. And McGeady runs forward with the ball, takes people on, puts crosses in. He's quite aggressive and forward thinking as well. So in that sense, if McGeady was fit, do we need Khazri?
Yeah, McGeady's everything we didn't have last season. He's tricky. His footwork is absolutely magnificent. I've never saw a player at Sunderland for a long time. Maybe since Stefan Sessegnon era, with feet who can move the ball that quickly and that intelligently, and he can get down the byline. He can put great crosses in as well. I think he's going to be key. I think he's better than Khazri. He's more suited to the English football than Khazri, in my opinion.
I like the fact that he also said that Grayson basically made him fall back in love with the game, didn't he? So that's got to be very promising ahead of this season if that's how he feels. Certainly going into what is obviously a competitive league and a very tough league. Right, well, we'll move on then. We'll talk actually about the two match winners. So obviously we've got Graben Graben in effect got a hat trick, didn't he? He decided he felt sorry. He felt sorry for Norwich when 3-0 down. And thought, go on then. We'll just give you a little late goal, even though it doesn't mean anything. But what I did like, you'll watch this more than me. Vaughan won the flick on, I think, for Graben's first, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Yeah. Now that's the one thing that. That's the one thing that Vaughan, I think, could offer here. Now, when we sign Vaughan, I know we said we're going to talk about Graben and McGeady, but I'll quickly mention Vaughan. Vaughan's the type of player that, for me, is someone who's going to... For me, ideally, Vaughan is a substitute player. To me, he's someone that if you're winning a game, say if you're winning it by 1-0, 2-1, something like that, you could bring him on with, say, 20 minutes to go, and he wins niggly fouls as a nuisance for the opposition, and then sort of go from there. Try and be a real handful. But that's the one thing I think Vaughan could have going for him if he stays fit, is that he could end up winning little headers and win flick-on. So he's linked up well with Graben from what I've seen in the first couple of games.
Yeah, he's linked up really well with him. And like I said, him coming off the bench could be great in a game. But I think he's done really well. I can't fault his effort. The only thing I can fault is his goal record, obviously. But that'll come. I believe that will come in time. He's doing really well, knocking balls on. He's a target man. And, we've lacked a target man. I can only think of what it would have been like to have Defoe along with him, because that would have played out so brilliantly. But, he's doing his job for the team right now. I know against Norwich he tracked back from, the edge of the Norwich box to the edge of our box and got a tackle in. And although he got a yellow card, he broke a player. And that's effort. And, that's what we need down there. And it's great to see from a fan's aspect for someone who actually cares about the football club and who'll actually put the effort in. And that I can't knock the guy for that. So
I'll tell you what, mind you, I love that his reactions when we've scored. I think he's been one of them. I think it's him, Graben, McGeady, and all them have gone absolutely ballistic when we have scored. But
yeah, I mean, sitting with my dad watching the game on Sunday, shout out to my dad. He said as soon as we scored, he said, "Look, we're born celebrating." And I thought, yeah, actually, this guy does give a shit.
Yeah, and such a contrast to last year, isn't it? It's just so much. I mean, obviously, I've gone on about last year enough. So, I mean, as far as Vaughan's concerned, I think he has got a place in the team. Don't get us wrong. And I do worry that, I mean, Bury fans, I think they've kept telling us that once he gets one, he sort of goes on and on and on and on and tries to score them. But again, to me, maybe the bottom end of the Championship, not so much, but I think there's a massive difference in quality between League One and the Championship. Like you say, the top end of League One to the top end of the Championship pulls apart completely. Yeah, you'll get the odd freak team that goes up and does back-to-back promotions, but in a general context, the quality and standard between the top end of League One and the Championship is just it couldn't get higher than that, really.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I still think he's got a part to play. I mean, the fact that he pressures defenders, honestly, he'll pressure defenders and make more room for Graben to get in, and that's shown. That definitely has shown. So I think he's a key member of the team now. I mean, I don't think there's any place for him on the bench at the moment. As long as we only have them two strikers, he's got to be playing every game. And I think we lose a big part of our dynamic if we don't play him. I really do, because then you're starting to have to play that passing football again, where people complain about the long ball, but it got us off the mark against Norwich, and it was working.
Yeah, I don't mind long ball tactics as long as it works.
Yeah, it was working against a team who wanted to play in front of us, and we could break on them, and that worked. And I've listened to a few Sheffield Wednesday fans; they play exactly the same. So moving on for tomorrow, hopefully we come out the same way. Let them make all the running and catch them.
Yeah, that will move on. Actually, we'll move on to tomorrow. Obviously, as far as we're concerned for tomorrow, this is a game that does worry me in a lot of ways. I think a lot of people, I mean, I've listened to people be very positive and saying confident, why can't we get anything from the game? Rightly so. Winning breeds confidence. It must. So, but as far as tomorrow goes, historically in the past, this is the type of game that Sunderland mess up in. Now, I'm not saying that Sheffield Wednesday are by any stretch a team we should be beaten, or we have a divine right to be, because when they're not. They're a team I expect to be up there. What concerns me is that they haven't won a game yet. I mean, the first two results that they had a 1-0 loss at Preston, I believe, and they drew 1-1 at home to QPR at the weekend, and neither of those are good results for Sheffield Wednesday's perspective. So this is a game that I do think Sheffield Wednesday will look at and say, well, we have to win this game. We have to win to get a good start on the board. As far as I'm concerned, if I was to take I would take a point tomorrow. Now that sounds very defeatist and very negative, but I think Sheffield Wednesday will be up for it. I'd like to hope we would be, because I think under Grayson so far we have proved that if we put the right application in, we can beat anyone in this league. That's only if, we put the right application in consistently, because I think we have got quality in the squad as far as the top six championship goes. Not saying we definitely will finish there, but we definitely have enough there for me to be challenging for the top six at the moment. But I mean, what do you think, Ben? I mean, personally, we'll quickly mention the Leeds game in a little bit here as well. But I think out of the next two games, if we got 4 points, I'd be happy with that.
Yeah, I think I'd take that as well. I'd be happy enough coming away from an away game with a point. I'm a bit scared with their strike force. They've got quite a lot of strikers. I mean, Stephen Fletcher, we all know, and it's sod's law that he'll score against us.
Yeah.
Being ex-Sunderland. So if you want to get your bets on, Fletcher, first goal scorer, that's what I'm doing.
Might as well.
Jordan Rhodes, another tricky striker. I mean, he's not been in the best run of form. I mean, he's played 2 this season, scored none. But again, he's got the potential to cause us problems.
Yeah, I think you've just mentioned Jordan Rhodes not in good form. Plays Sunderland, right? We know what's happening here. Then that's him and Fletcher scoring tomorrow. Then
second goal scorer Jordan Rhodes.
Yeah, right. Okay, congratulations, Sheffield Wednesday fans, on your first win tomorrow.
Sam Winnall, scored on Saturday. I've heard a lot of Sheffield Wednesday fans, criticising the likes of Gary Hooper and Jordan Rhodes, but they really seem to be into Sam Winnall. So if he starts the game, I'll be watching him closely to see what he's about. And I think he could cause us a few problems. But apart from that, I mean, at the back, I know they've only got one recognised centre-back playing at the moment. So that's something we can definitely, get on to, especially with the way of Vaughan and Graben are linking up at the moment, and McGeady's on form. We can really hurt them there.
What I would say then, as far as Sheffield Wednesday going forward, is as everyone knows, I haven't mentioned this on the podcast before, but I've mentioned on Twitter countless times, I don't rate Fletcher. I think that certainly he's probably a good championship striker in terms of goal ratios, but I think that his attitude's poor, and I think technically he's quite decent, but half the time he doesn't get into the right position. He doesn't look like he actually wants to attempt to get into the right positions and actually try and find some space for himself to try and score. But what I would say is that Fletcher is actually quite good in the air. If you play to Fletcher's strengths, he is a very, very good aerial forward. And I would like to hope that Browning and Corney would have enough about them to sort of cope with that.
Well, I'd be putting Browning straight onto Fletcher. And if I was Grayson, I'd be saying to Browning, look, the first chance you get, put a hard one in on him. Make sure that he doesn't get near that ball. Stand want your authority on him, because we saw plenty of times at Sunderland when Fletcher played, the defender would, first 10 minutes, put one in on him, and he wouldn't be bothered for the rest of the game. He'd think,
Exactly.
I don't want to be up against this guy. I'll not make an effort, and that's what we need to do with him. We need to play him our own game, so to speak, because obviously we knew him really well, and there's still players in there in that squad that was playing when Fletcher was there, like your O'Shea's. So maybe that'll count as a positive.
You'd hope so. I think that again, Sheffield Wednesday will truly be up for a battle. But I mean, I just think again, I still expect them to be up there. I mean, people got to remember that as much as 2 games. I mean, if you look at Newcastle when they lost their first 2 games last season, there's loads of games and loads of time for them to make up ground. But I think it would be a huge. But I mean, to me, we will see where Sunderland are as a unit by the end of the week. By the time we play Sheffield Wednesday and Leeds, I think if we do well in these 2 games, that could be a statement of intent for the rest of the season.
Yeah, when I looked at the fixtures at the start of the season, Sheffield Wednesday and Leeds are the 2 teams that I couldn't wait to play. I mean, I love going to Sheffield Wednesday's ground, and Leeds is obviously quite a rivalry there from 1973. But I can't wait for Sunderland to test themselves against these teams. And like you say, if we do win, then that's even better. But like I say, 4 points I think is a respectable total from them 2 games.
Yeah, and I'd
be buzzing. I'd be buzzing if we got 4 points from these 2 games.
Yeah, I would.
You know?
In all fairness, I mean, I know that sounds again quite negative, but I think if we got 4 points from these 2 games, you would then say if you were offered 8 points from Derby, from Norwich, from Sheffield Wednesday, and from Leeds, I can't think of many Sunderland fans that wouldn't have taken that.
I think just psychologically as well, being unbeaten, it'll bring the squad closer together, and it'll put a lot more faith in the board, hopefully, to trust Grayson to go and sign players. You know, it'll just breed that confidence.
Exactly. Mind you,
we've got the mighty Kieran Westwood to beat in goal first, though.
in all seriousness, actually, I didn't mind Kieran Westwood at Sunderland when he was here. I didn't think he got much of a fair chance. I think it's probably because when Westwood was here, Mignolet was a cut above him at the time, and therefore he wouldn't get his chance. He wouldn't play a decent Westwood ahead of an outstanding Mignolet at the time. And then when obviously Mignolet did leave, Westwood had a pretty shit defence in front of him. And even I remember there was the Arsenal game a couple of years ago actually when we played and we lost 3-1 due to that. You remember that contentious game where Altidore had a legitimate goal that was disallowed and Bakary Sagna at least wasn't even sent off for his troubles. But in that game Westwood was doing all right, and Westwood in a general context was doing okay. And then obviously I think at Hull, who was it that took him out? Was it Paul McShane took him out?
Yes, it injured his back. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah. And then since then, he's never obviously looked back in the team, and no one came in since. I think certainly Westwood. I mean, obviously, let us know in the comments, Sheffield Wednesday fans, what you think about Westwood, what you think about Fletcher as well, the ex-Sunderland lads.
I can speak on Sheffield Wednesday fans' behalf here, because I've heard a few reactions from the game on Saturday at Sheffield Wednesday and QPR, and a lot of the fans are saying that Westwood's their best keeper in a few years.
Christ.
So I mean, he must be doing well there. So maybe my statement about the mighty Kieran Westwood might be true.
Well, Vaughan grabbing, yeah, you have a pretty big mighty task on your hands tomorrow. Mind you, McGeady up against him, that'll be quite interesting.
Yeah.
Hopefully McGeady puts out another bit of. I still kind of believe with McGeady, man, we got 250. It was 250k. That's just.
Yeah. I mean, they have really been took down the river, Everton, there with that deal, and I'm glad it's the other way around for once.
Yeah, exactly. Mind you saying that, I don't know if McGeady's got any injury concerns as to why that's why we got him that cheap. I think he had a year left on his contract and they were really desperate to get rid of him. And they probably didn't need the money, so they probably just thought, we'll just get him off the books, get his wages off the books.
Well, an interesting stat is for McGeady. In 2016, he made 13 appearances for Sheffield Wednesday on loan and scored 1 goal. So it's another added incentive for McGeady to show what he can do against an old club.
Fair enough then. Well, anyway, guys, right. Well, that is we'll quickly. I want to briefly touch on the Leeds game because I don't think we're going to do a pod between Sheffield Wednesday and Leeds because I'm away for the back end of this week. So, I mean, previewing Leeds. Obviously, by the point that we'll be looking at Leeds, well, obviously the Sheffield Wednesday game will have happened, regardless of whatever the result is. So, I mean, as far as Leeds concerned, it's quite a historic fixture, obviously, because of the FA Cup 73 Cup final. I remember going to the Leeds game a couple of years ago in the FA Cup when we played them, and I think their fans were absolutely magnificent that day. They were probably a bit unlucky in some respects not to get a replay out of it, but I'd like to hope that if we do well against Sheffield Wednesday, the atmosphere against Leeds should be, hopefully, fingers crossed, will be class. Especially with it being a TV game, a 5:30 kickoff. There's something about late games that I just like. I don't know what it is, but it can only be a good thing. If we do well against Sheff Wed, the atmosphere, I think people really look forward with optimism to the Leeds game.
I mean, I like it. About 5:30 games, I like the extended time in the pub beforehand. But
yeah, it's true.
So
a lot of people will.
I was buzzing to say that Leeds was a 5:30, but yeah, Leeds will be. I think it'll be an even tougher game than Sheffield Wednesday. They love to score goals. You know, they scored 3 first game, 4 against Port Vale in the cup. Surprisingly, drew a blank against Preston, but I think that wasn't for the want of trying. When I saw the highlights, I think they did have numerous shots on goal. Yeah, Chris Wood for me will be the game winner. If he's on form, I think he might provide us a very big test, so to speak. Yeah, I think that'll be the test for Brown, and that'll be the acid test. I think.
Yeah,
I'll have more to say on him after that. Yeah.
Yeah, the mighty Vernon Anita playing as well. I don't even know.
I'm not too scared about Vernon Anita. I know I said I'd sign him for Sunderland, but watching him so far this season, I haven't been overly impressed.
Right then. Well, I mean, the last thing I'll quite ask on the fixtures, and we'll briefly talk about transfers at the end. As far as the fixtures go, by the end of August, what would you say would be an acceptable points tally? After we've played Barnsley, 5 games, what would you say would be a good points tally?
So, if you're saying we'll take 8 points until after the Leeds game, how many championship games have we got after the? Is that just Barnsley?
Yeah.
In August?
So we've only got 3 championship games now between now and the end of August.
I'd expect us to beat Barnsley, so I'll go 11.
I would say if we got 10 points, I know I said I'd take 4 points from the next 2 games. I think if we got 4 from the next 3 and we got 6 from the next 3. If we won the next 2 games, if we won 2 of the next 3, even if we lost the other one, and we got 10 points by the end of August, I would say that's a very, very good start. Considering what's happened off the pitch, considering the nature of the fixtures that we've had early on. So, yeah, I don't know about you. If we got to 10 points, I'd be pretty happy with that. But I mean, Barnsley, like I said, it's the one out of the next 3 that you would hope that we should be able to win.
Yeah, I think Barnsley's the most nailed on one, which ultimately makes it the one Sunderland will lose.
Yeah.
Coming back into my pessimism again. But
he's descended. Yeah. He's descended back into pessimistic mode.
Yes, I mean, until Sunderland put together a good run of form, that fear will always be there. I mean, 3 PM's unbeaten, I think, is very good for us, so we're probably due a defeat soon anyway. But time will tell. But I'm buzzing for tomorrow. I can't wait to be at Sheffield and watch us play against them.
Yeah, I'll be at work, you lucky bugger. I'm jealous. Anyways, right. Yeah. The last thing we'll talk about before we wrap up, transfers. Now, obviously, we've said before, transfers have gone a bit quiet recently. But obviously, I think that's masked over by the fact that we did actually beat Norwich. So, what would you still want to happen between now and the end of the window? I mean, like I said before, I'll start on this one quickly. I probably at this point I want Coney and Kasri to go as long as it's for decent money. If they do go, we need at least 1 centre half, probably 2 to be honest, if that's the case. And then you've got you need to get a striker. I still think you need to get someone who's going to get like 20 plus goals or almost as certain guarantee it as possible. So, but at the minute it's a debate whether we're going to have the money and the finances to get that. I mean, even if we did sell Coney and Kasri, I mean, how much of that money are we going to see into the transfer budget, knowing what the hierarchy is like at the minute and given our financial situation?
Yeah, I think it'll come down to getting loan players in. I don't know if there's a cap on loan players in the Championship as there is in the Premier League. I'm not sure about that, but definitely get rid of Coney and Kasri. That probably needs to be done financially. Getting another centre back and another striker, and I think I'll be happy with that. I think we might be pushing it to get 2 centre backs, but yeah, sell a centre back and a striker, getting replacements, and I'll be pretty happy with that.
Yeah, I think I'd probably be the same. I mean, also, it's obviously subject to the fact that the thing that worries me is if we get injuries, then we've got a thin enough squad as it is. Sorry, the dog's barking in the background, so if you hear that, I apologise. But the fact is that unless we get like free agent centre backs or something, it's going. If we get injuries, I think we're buggered as a squad because we've got a thin squad as it is. So
that's where we've got to blood the young guns, though. That needs to be done. But, I mean, if they're ready or not, they're going to have to be used. Like Joe Lasoro, I'm really critical of Joe Lasoro now because I've saw him in a few games and he looks a bit lightweight. And the
you're not the only one who said that.
The thing coming out of the club was Asoro was miles ahead of Maja. When I've watched Josh Maja, I think he's miles ahead of Asoro. Obviously, he's been sent to see a specialist, so he'll not be in contention, I think, to clear tomorrow, maybe Saturday, if everything goes well. But you've got to look, we've got one more to come back. I think he's going to be a big part to play. I think with his pace, and I think he'll find his way in this league. I think he'll be a real coup for us this year.
Well, I would agree. I think Watmore, and obviously when Maya comes back, I think actually there's a point. I forgot about Maya, so we might end up having a few decent options there already. I mean, the only area where I think we are actually definitely sorted is in the middle of the park in midfield. I don't think when that's done, I don't think all said and done, I don't think we need any more midfielders, unless obviously one leaves.
I agree. Gibson, when he played against Bury, for all of my negative comments on him after the Celtic game, I couldn't believe the performance he put in. I thought he was really good. I thought he didn't really put a foot wrong, to be honest, and I'd be confident having him back in. It just shows how one game can change everything. He came out with the right attitude, and obviously things have been said behind the scenes to discipline him, and it's obviously got the message across, and he's come out and give a good performance.
Do you not think in many ways though, that his drunken outburst could potentially be a good thing? It could be a good thing. It could have cleared the air.
Yeah, reluctantly, yes. But
yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, it shouldn't have happened in the first place, but at the same time, if it helps clear the air and it helps become a good thing, then I don't see that as being anything particularly bad. If it helps us in the long run, we could be looking at that and saying that was one of the best things that could have happened to us this year.
Yeah, why did we win the championship? Because of Darren Gibson's outburst after the Celtic game.
Darren Gibson, get as pissed as you like on a regular basis if we win games.
Come Wolves at home last game of the season when we're lifting up the trophy, that'll be we'll all be singing Darren Gibson's name, no doubt.
Yeah, if no doubt when we win the championship, we won't have the champagne celebration and hoying it all over the players. Darren Gibson will just drink it all and then just be absolutely drunk and hammered out of his head for the rest of the day.
I'll buy the guy a drink if we win the championship.
I'll hold you to that. Like Darren Gibson, if you're somehow watching or listening, Ben will promise to buy you a drink if we win the championship. So that's enough of an incentive for yourself. But anyways, alright guys, I think we're going to wrap it up there. So I apologise for the disturbances during the pod, but thanks again to Ben for coming on. And I think it's just nice to be a little bit more positive and sort of talk about some good things rather than actually be negative all the time. So no doubt when we lose the next 2 games, we'll be right back down with a downer next week. This is Sunderland. So anyway, right, thanks Ben, and I'm looking forward.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. I'll be keeping track of the next 2 games. Fingers crossed. Well, who knows? Fingers crossed. The best case scenario, we're going to be in double figures by the time we next talk, and points wise by the time we come to the next podcast. But I very much doubt that. If we end up drawing tomorrow and winning on Saturday, or vice versa, I would take that. So, thanks Ben again, and thank guys for watching and listening. And we'll see you hopefully next week. Hopefully we'll have some positive results. You can say what you tried to say last time, Ben.
How are the lads?